to vote, 1,300 years before Western societies even considered it.
I think it's very interesting that a lot of feminists overlook the fact that, in this country in particular, women only got the right to vote in the last 100 years.
Still, in some areas of the Islamic world, many women live harshly restricted lives. To the average Westerner, the traditional head covering worn by Muslim women, the hijab, has become a symbol of oppression.
I remember particularly walking down the street, and a woman was looking very intently at me, staring very intently. And she came up and she walked directly up to me and she put her hand on my shoulder and she said, "Honey, you're in America now. You don't have to wear that here."
To me, the hijab is just 45 inches of material. It's ironic that it has become such a pivotal issue of concern, both within the Muslim community and for non-Muslims.
The covering of one's head is an aspect of several major religions. Today, many Christians and Jews continue to honor this ancient symbol of humility before God. Likewise, some Muslim women choose to wear the hijab only during prayer and other religious occasions.
I don't wear the hijab. I decided not to wear it. I think modesty is something that comes from the inside out. It's not just about one scarf, one piece of cloth. That doesn't make you a good Muslim.
To read it literally, the Quran requires modesty of both women and men. But the specific choice of covering, from the total concealment of the Afghan Burkaa to the slightly more revealing Shador of Iran, reflect cultural preferences, not the edicts of Allah.
Islam was never meant to be a religion that oppresses women. It's just turned out that way because of the way it's manipulated by people who are really expressing their own culture that's patriarchal and tribal and is a reflection of what the society was like before Islam came to the world.
Yet, by the end of the 18th century, no veil could protect Islam from the intrusion of the West. In the 16th century, under Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent, the Ottoman armies became a threat to Western Europe when they conquered the Balkans and much of the Crimea. The Ottomans laid siege to Vienna, capital of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, in 1529, and again in 1683. But this was the farthest into Europe that the Islamic Empire would ever reach. By the 18th century, the Ottomans could no longer keep pace with the emerging Western European powers.
The question of why that change took place is one that is embedded, I think, in the broader developments of world history. That the real difference in the 18th century is the coming of the Industrial Revolution.
The Ottomans' once brilliant bureaucracy became bloated and corrupt. Their powerful sultans reduced to political weaklings. The great Ottoman Empire was beginning to crumble. In the early summer of 1798, a fearless young French general named Napoleon Bonaparte and his invasion force stepped ashore at Alexandria on the Mediterranean coast of Egypt. A few weeks later, in the Battle of the Pyramids, Napoleon easily defeated a larger Egyptian army and captured the city of Cairo. Over the next century, France and England took advantage of weakening governments throughout the Middle East.
Various areas were taken at different times, but on the whole, each conquest shared some characteristics with all the other ones, and that was that the Europeans had a definite idea of ethnic superiority, which made an absolute line between them and the conquered people. And that line was all the more clear with the Muslims because the Muslims were different in religion as well.
European pathways to power followed different routes. European financiers provided funds to Egypt for the construction of the Suez Canal, which began in 1859. However, the massive debts incurred by Egypt in its struggle for modernization ultimately led to Britain taking over the canal and the country.
By 1882, the British simply occupied Egypt and made sure that nothing that would undermine British security or British access through the Suez Canal.
Meanwhile, France concentrated on Algeria, intent on making it the breadbasket of Europe.
The lands of the people were all confiscated. The Arabic language and the religion of Islam were discouraged by the French, so that was a more vicious type of colonialism.
But it was World War I that caused many Islamic nations to come under direct foreign rule. In 1914, the crumbling Ottoman Empire allied itself with the Central Powers of Germany, Austria, and Hungary. Upon their defeat in 1918, the remaining Ottoman territories became spoils of war, to be divided up among the winners. Britain obtained control of Egypt, Palestine, and Arabia. France took Lebanon, Syria, Morocco, and Tunisia, in addition to its already established colony of Algeria.
What this does is that effectively it deconstructs and dismantles the system of authority that Islam had developed over 1,200 years.
Under the colonial yoke, unrest was brewing, fueled by disgruntled Muslim writers and scholars. Ultimately, their goal would be to drive out the West and to establish their own governments based on traditional Islamic principles. One of the most effective of these opposition groups was the Muslim Brotherhood.
The Muslim Brotherhood is an organization which was founded in 1928 by Hassan al-Banna in Egypt, which originally was meant to regenerate Islam in that country. But later on, it became a significant and revolutionary political movement.
The Muslim Brotherhood was an important part of the revolutionary efforts that ultimately led to Britain's withdrawal from Egypt in the 1950s. Elsewhere, after World War II, other colonies found their own routes to independence. Some peaceful, others bloody. Yet some of these fledgling nations didn't return to traditional Islamic ideals. Instead, many new states fell under power-hungry secular and authoritarian governments, often corrupt reflections of the Western colonialism from which they won their freedom.
Most people in the West forget that one of the most important heritages of imperialism throughout the world, and in particular in the Middle East, is that imperialism brought to the Middle East real ideas and skills in having central authoritarian governments.
The groups resisting these new forms of rule became known as Islamists, whose message is reflected in the words of Sayyid Qutb, leader of the Muslim Brotherhood.